Imagine living in a town where you could just walk across the street and be in another country.
Wow.
That was the reality for the residents of Ambos, Nogales.
Hmm.
It's a binational community right on the U.S.-Mexico border.
I see.
And for decades, the border was practically invisible,
Really?
more like a suggestion than a rigid divide.
Fascinating.
But this easygoing relationship completely changed in the early 20th century.
Oh.
It culminated in a really violent clash.
Oh, no.
And that clash led to the construction of the first permanent border wall between the U.S. and Mexico.
That's quite a shift.
Yeah. Today, we're going to dive into this pivotal moment in history.
Okay.
We're going to trace the roots of the conflict and explore its lasting consequences.
It's amazing how the story of Ambos Nogales shows how borders can change
Right.
and how outside forces can really reshape communities.
Exactly.
What seems like a clear dividing line in one era can be a place of seamless interaction in another.
Yeah, and that's what we see in the sources that describe life in Ambos Nogales before the 1900s.
Yeah.
It sounds almost like a utopia.
Oh, wow.
Families living on one side and working on the other.
Okay.
Kids playing together without a care in the world.
I see.
Businesses flourishing on both sides.
Wow.
It was a truly integrated society,
Sounds idyllic.
a real testament to the power of shared lives and economies.
The sources paint a very vivid picture of this period,
Yeah.
describing residents just casually crossing International Street.
Wow.
The international boundary was marked by a monument and an open stretch of land.
So simple.
Yeah, it was a time when the border was more symbolic than physical. It really fostered a deep sense of interdependence between the two communities.
But as we know, even the most idyllic situations can be upended by forces beyond our control.
Right.
And the Mexican Revolution, which started in 1910, brought this era of peaceful coexistence to an abrupt end.
I see.
Violence started spilling over the border,
Uh-oh.
and anxiety started rising on the U.S. side.
Yeah, that makes sense.
This was a huge change
Yeah.
from the previous era of open borders and amicable relations.
Absolutely.
The Mexican Revolution brought a level of instability that the U.S. government felt they had to address.
Right.
We see this reflected in the sources.
Okay.
They describe troops being deployed to the border
Wow.
and even the construction of temporary barbed wire fences.
A sign of things to come.
Definitely. And to make things even worse,
Hmm.
World War I was going on across the ocean,
Right.
fueling paranoia and suspicion on top of everything else.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Then, like a match thrown onto dry tinder, came the Zimmerman telegram in 1917.
Oh, wow.
This was an intercepted communication
Okay.
where Germany tried to get Mexico to join them against the U.S.
I see.
And it really sent shockwaves through the American government and the public.
You're right.
The Zimmerman telegram really did have a huge impact on U.S.-Mexico relations,
Absolutely.
even though it failed to achieve its goal.
True.
It made the fears and anxieties that were already there even worse,
Okay.
leading to much stricter controls at the border
I see.
and an even bigger breakdown of trust.
Imagine the impact this had on the residents of Ambos Nogales.
Yeah.
Suddenly, they're caught up in the middle of global events they have absolutely no control over.
So we have these rising tensions,
Right.
fueled by the Mexican Revolution and the anxieties of World War I,
Yeah,
almost like a powder keg waiting to explode.
exactly.
And then in the summer of 1918,
Okay.
a seemingly minor incident sparked a confrontation that would forever change the U.S.-Mexico border.
Wow.
It was the Battle of Ambos Nogales.
This battle really shows how actions of individuals,
Yeah.
when they're amplified by existing tension,
Right.
can have consequences that are really devastating and far-reaching.
Exactly.
What began as just a dispute between a couple of people quickly escalated into a full-blown international conflict
Wow.
with tragic results.
The sources paint a chaotic picture of what happened on August 27, 1918. A Mexican carpenter named Jose Maria Carrillo was crossing back into Mexico,
Right.
and a U.S. customs agent insisted that he come back for inspection.
Oh, wow.
But Mexican guards argued that he was already on Mexican soil.
I see.
Then a U.S. soldier pointed his rifle at Carrillo and fired a warning shot.
Oh, no.
Or at least that's what some accounts say.
The details of who fired that first shot are still kind of murky.
Yeah.
There are conflicting accounts on both sides.
Right.
But what's clear is that this single shot just ignited a firestorm.
Wow.
It exposed all that deep-seated mistrust and resentment that had been building for years.
Imagine you're living in this once peaceful, integrated community,
Yeah,
and suddenly you're caught in the crossfire of a battle.
that'd be terrifying.
Gunfire erupting from both sides,
Wow.
involving U.S. Army troops, Mexican civilians,
Oh my,
even members of the Nogales, Arizona Rifle Club,
really?
which was a civilian militia group
I see.
that played a significant role in escalating the violence.
The involvement of that rifle club is an interesting detail. It
Right.
shows how regular people can get drawn into conflicts so quickly. Absolutely. Especially when they're fueled by fear. Right. And nationalism. And the perception of a threat. Yeah. It adds another layer of complexity. It really does. To this already chaotic situation.
Totally.
It must have been terrifying.
Yeah.
People scrambling for cover, families being separated,
Yeah.
the sounds of gunfire echoing through the streets.
Oh my.
And in the middle of all this chaos,
Yeah.
Felix B. Peñalosa, who was the mayor of Nogales, Sonora,
Okay.
he bravely stepped out with a white flag,
Wow.
trying to get everyone to calm down.
Oh, wow. That's brave.
But tragically, he was shot and killed.
Oh, no.
Peñalosa's death was a turning point.
It made the tension even worse
Right.
and really solidified this perception of American aggression.
Absolutely.
It's a stark reminder of the human cost of conflict,
Right.
how fast things can get out of control
Yes.
when communication breaks down and violence takes over.
And what's even more shocking is that
Even as things were getting more and more desperate,
All right.
attempts to de-escalate were met with resistance.
really,
The Mexican consul was desperate for a ceasefire,
okay.
and he pleaded with the U.S. Army commander, Lieutenant Colonel Frederick J. Herman.
I see.
But Herman's response was just defiant and honestly really disturbing.
Oh, wow.
He said, "American troops don't carry white flags and don't use them."
Oh my gosh.
He even threatened to burn down Nogales, Sonora.
That's unbelievable.
It's hard to believe that someone could have such a blatant disregard for human life.
Herman's response really reveals a lot
Yeah,
about the power dynamics and the attitudes of that time.
absolutely.
His refusal to acknowledge the white flag
Right.
and his aggressive posture
Yeah.
really underscored the unequal footing of the two nations
Right.
and the disregard for Mexican lives that was prevalent among some U.S. officials at the time.
It's a sobering reminder of how power imbalances and prejudice can fuel conflict and really get in the way of peaceful resolution.
Absolutely.
Eventually, after hours of intense fighting,
Okay.
a ceasefire was reached.
Hmm.
But the damage was already done.
Right.
15 Mexicans were killed,
Oh, gosh.
including civilians and children,
Oh, no.
and 7 Americans lost their lives.
It's a heartbreaking reminder of the consequences of these escalating tensions
Yeah.
and the devastating toll of violence.
The Battle of Ambos, Nogales left a scar on both communities.
Right.
A scar that is still felt even a century later.
The aftermath of the battle is just as fascinating
Yeah.
as the battle itself.
Right.
There were investigations.
Okay. That highlighted the mistreatment of Mexicans by some U.S. border officials.
I see.
But one major outcome, maybe driven by a desire to prevent more violence,
Okay.
was a recommendation that would shape the border for generations to come,
Really?
the construction of a permanent wall.
Wow.
And so the story of Ambos Nogales takes this dramatic turn
Right.
from a place of seamless interaction and shared lives.
Yeah.
It becomes a site of conflict, division, and the rise of this physical barrier
I see.
that would symbolize the increasingly complex and often strained relationship
Right.
between the U.S. and Mexico. We've talked about the events leading up to the Battle of Ambos Nogales
Right.
and the immediate aftermath,
Yeah.
which saw the construction of the first permanent border wall there. But what happened after that?
Wow.
Did the wall actually do what it was supposed to do?
Right.
Did it prevent more conflict and violence?
That's a question that people are still debating.
Yeah.
Historians, policymakers, even today.
Wow.
The wall in Ambos Nogales has changed a lot over the years. It started as just barbed wire,
Okay,
then chain link fencing,
I see.
and now it's this big steel and concrete structure.
Wow.
But if it actually works, is complicated. I mean, it's definitely a physical barrier,
Yeah.
but history shows it hasn't stopped people from crossing illegally or drugs from coming through.
So it hasn't really kept things completely safe?
It seems like it hasn't. Yeah.
It makes you wonder about what they didn't expect to happen
Exactly.
when they built the wall.
Like unintended consequences.
Right.
Yeah, so they designed the wall with gaps for surveillance.
Okay.
But those gaps ended up letting families and friends separated by the border
Wow.
still see each other and talk.
Oh, wow.
It's kind of poignant, don't you think?
Yeah.
It shows that people still need to connect,
Right.
even with these physical and political barriers.
Like human relationships and communities just find a way.
Yeah, they don't always follow the boundaries that we try to set.
That detail about the wall's design, really makes me think about how much walls can really separate people and cultures.
Right.
But it's not all positive.
No, yeah.
The wall in Ambos, Nogales also reflects this darker side of border history.
Definitely.
The sources talk about times where the wall has been a site of tragedy and continued tension.
Like the case of Jose Antonio Elena Rodriguez,
Right.
a 16-year-old boy. He was shot and killed by a U.S. Border Patrol agent in 2012.
Oh, wow.
Just a few blocks from the wall.
It's heartbreaking.
It is.
This legacy of conflict and mistrust
Yeah.
is still present at the border.
Even after all these years.
It makes you wonder if walls actually make things safer.
Right.
Or if they just create new problems and divisions.
That's the big question, isn't it?
But the story of Ambos, Nogales isn't just about conflict and division.
Okay.
It also shows us that there might be other ways to manage the border.
Really?
About 60 miles west of Ambos, Nogales,
I see.
there's the Tohono O'odham Nation. Their land crosses the U.S.-Mexico border.
Interesting.
Tell me about the Tohono O'odham Nation.
Well, they have a unique perspective on the border.
Okay.
For centuries, their families and communities have lived on both sides, and they've maintained this fluid connection across the border.
That's amazing.
And while they do face challenges with border security and illegal crossings, their approach focuses on collaboration and mutual respect.
I see.
They see the border as a shared space, not a line that divides.
So they manage it in a way that's more nuanced.
Right.
And considers their culture.
Exactly.
It's like a different approach.
It really is.
Compared to what we've seen in Ambos, Nogales.
Yeah, it suggests that there are other ways to do things.
Right.
Ways that put human connection and understanding first.
Rather than just enforcing physical barriers.
Absolutely.
It's a good example of how indigenous knowledge can help us create better border policies.
Policies that are more humane and sustainable.
Right.
It makes us think beyond walls.
Yeah.
And look for solutions that actually address why people migrate in the first place.
Absolutely.
Solutions that help communities on both sides work together.
So what can we learn from all of this?
Well, the story of Ambos, Nogales shows us how complex the history of the U.S.-Mexico border is. It makes us think critically about walls. And whether security at any cost is really what's best for everyone.
Yeah.
But maybe most importantly, it reminds us that human connection and dignity should always be our priority.
Right.
Especially when we're making decisions about borders and immigration.
I think that's a great takeaway.
It's been a really insightful deep dive.
It has.
Thanks for having me.
The history of Ambos, Nogales is a powerful reminder that borders are more than just lines on a map.
Right.
They represent connections between people, shared histories,
and challenges that we face together.
As we've seen, fear and misunderstanding can lead to conflict and division.
Definitely.
But cooperation and empathy can help us create a better future.
A future that's more just and humane.
The choice is ours.